Hi, I'm Lucy Davis.
And I'm Hasan Tahir.
And this is Room for Improvement, the podcast dedicated to service improvement in Axial Spa Care.
In each episode, both Lucy and I will be meeting healthcare professionals who have taken on a service improvement project in their department.
We're going to be talking to our guests about their experiences and taking a deep dive into different strategies and techniques that they've used to push forward to success.
We know service improvement isn't a case of one size fits all, but we hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and armed with actionable insights to drive improvements in your own department. In my mind, I want our listeners to appreciate that there is no such thing as failure, and that success can take multiple attempts. So Lucy, it's the first ever episode of our brand new podcast, Room for Improvement, which is brought to you by the National Axial Spondyloarthritis Society, also known by most of us as NASS. I'm so happy to be co-hosting this exciting new venture with you. As you know, we worked together before, and I know you because of your role as Deputy Director at the NHS Transformation Unit. For our listeners, can you tell us a bit about your role and what you do?
Of course. So, as you say, I work for the NHS Transformation Unit, or the TU, and we are a partner in the delivery of the Aspiring to Excellence programme that NASS is delivering around service improvement in Axial Spa. So the TU is an NHS internal consultancy service, so I'm NHS employed, and our role is to work alongside health and care clients to deliver major change programmes. So particularly for me as a deputy director there, I oversee and support different programmes to work in partnership with clients to transform health and care outcomes for people and communities. And I think that's something I'm really passionate about and have been fortunate through the programme to get involved in, really trying to empower change from within. And that is probably enough about me. So Hasan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your role as a consultant physician and rheumatologist?
No worries. So as you know, I'm a rheumatologist. I'm a consultant at the Royal Free London NHS Trust, which is in London. I'm also an honorary clinical professor in the Division of Medicine at UCL. So my main clinical and research interest is in SPA, focusing really on early identification and novel biological therapies. In my previous trust, which is at Barts Health, which is on the east side of London, I actually led the Axial SPA service, which was fortunate enough to be recognised by the BSR as the emerging best UK practice. You may have also recently read a publication of our QI work, or quality improvement work, which demonstrated how we consistently reduced the time to diagnosis in Axial SPA to approximately 3 years in our cohort. At Royal Free, where I am now, I also lead the Axial SPA service, which fortunately is part of the NASS Aspiring to Excellence program, which we're hopefully talking about a bit later on in the podcast. Some of you may be aware of my app that I co-developed called the MySpa app. It's an educational app and it's freely available. My so-called claim to fame, maybe besides this podcast, clearly, is I appeared also on the BBC Hospital series last year, in which they highlighted my involvement and my team's involvement as the principal investigator within the COVID research at my trust. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Thanks, Hasan. And I think just working alongside you and knowing what I know, you're an incredible, passionate clinician. So hopefully we're going to be bringing some real in-depth clinical knowledge through yourself and some service improvement and understanding of how we can do transformation across the NHS and health and care systems from me. A little double act. Let's see how we go, hey? So without further ado, let's get straight into the nub of today's problem. The big question we want to answer is, why is service improvement in Axial Spa Care needed? Before we get into the discussion with our first guest of the podcast, let's hear from Max. He was diagnosed with Axial Spa at the age of just 17 after searching for answers for years.
I can understand why doctors found it incredibly difficult to diagnose my AS when I was younger, because I started having symptoms when I was really, really, really young. And as a result of that, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 17, and I couldn't kind of like go to school, and I had to give up competitive sport, and it was really difficult. And as a young child, the symptoms weren't AS related, so I had psoriasis on my feet, and then no one really understood why, and it was a whole thing, and then had allergy tests, and nothing was really showing why that was the issue, and it got really bad for a long, long time. And then when I was about 13, I started having kind of like aches and pains and occasional bouts of sciatica. And then the doctors and physios thought that was more related to sport and rugby and swimming and growing pains and everything else. And, you know, you're 13, 14, 15, 16, you're a teenager, you know, that's when you go through all of that. And I didn't particularly think it was that normal. And then a bit later on, I started having gut issues, and that was a whole issue. And then one random summer holiday, my knee swelled up to the size of a football. And then I ended up spending kind of like 8 days in and out of NHS hospitals, trying to figure out what was going on and why my knee was swelling up. You know, I'd have dermatology specialists and I'd have gastro specialists and all of it. And it was just loads of different departments trying to deal with different things. And my parents were trying to kind of keep on top of it and get the health service to keep on top of it as well. And then I ended up eventually being referred to an NHS hospital, finally another department, essentially around a different trust. And I'd just gone under their care, and I'd gone away on holiday skiing, and we were on our way back to the UK, and we'd been there for a couple of weeks, and it was really nice, and I had a great time, and nothing was wrong. And then I literally got out of the car and my legs just stopped working. And then I just ended up bedbound for months. And then that was the end of that chapter of life, essentially, because from that point onwards, it was now a health battle. And eventually I was diagnosed with AS, axial spondyloarthritis, after the doctor at the new hospital that I was at took a much more kind of like holistic look at everything and kind of pieced together the skin issues, the psoriasis and the gastro issues, as well as the aches and pains, and came up with the diagnosis of AS. And the issue was, at the time, the drug that I needed to be put on was very expensive. So they needed to show that none of the other treatments were working, essentially. So I spent months being essentially kept deliberately ill, trying meds that they knew weren't going to help me, to show the trustee board or the NHS trusts that there was no alternative and that they could justify spending the money.
Gosh, thanks, Max, for sharing that with us. It really does bring it to life, doesn't it? And it's quite the journey he went on.
I mean, it's really sad to actually hear that story. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, it's actually it's not dissimilar to a lot of the patients that I've seen as well. And what's really heartening is that young individual patients like Max, not only do they have to go through this journey of suffering with pains for years, not being identified, but you see that it affects their schooling, it affects them socially and psychologically. But what is really, really great to hear is that he's now on treatment, and hopefully, he's on the way, to improving and getting his life back. And as I said, this is actually a very typical story that we see in clinical practice.
Just incredible, and really does bring to life why it's so important that we improve the services, and why we've got to get it right, and get it right quickly, to really try and pull that journey quick into a short period of time. And I think actually that leads me very nicely onto our fabulous guest of the day. So we're delighted to have with us Dr Dale Webb, who is the Chief Exec Officer of the National Axial Spondyloarthritis Society, or NASS, as we're going to call it. Welcome, Dale.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Hasan. I'm delighted to be here.
Hey, Dale. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. I think you've got a fascinating background. And I believe you joined NASS around about 2017. I remember meeting you when you first started. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? And really, if you don't mind, touching on your early experiences with QI work.
Yeah, of course, Hasan. So my background originally was working in public health and health promotion in the NHS, and then spent a lot of time working in academia. But I did spend 10 years working at the Health Foundation. And the Health Foundation really spearheaded the introduction of quality improvement techniques into NHS organisations. And it drew upon the experience of some amazing work going on in the US, plus also in some of the Nordic countries. And it just showed that, you can have all the clinical guidelines in the world that you want, but if you want to actually improve healthcare, you've also got to tap into the intrinsic motivators of clinicians who want to do the best by their patients. And you can support them in really practical ways to improve their care. We led a very significant patient safety program and other programs, and we and others proved that quality improvement tools and techniques can be really successfully applied to help clinicians make a whole range of improvements which ultimately change patient outcomes and experience.
Fantastic. I mean, I know that you've been in NASS for a good 4 or 5 years and what you've done, and hopefully we'll talk a bit about that in the next few minutes. But what I want to do is focus obviously on Axial SPA, and you obviously listened to Max's story, which, I mean, like I said earlier, is a really common story. Really, we see this a lot. In your own words, what do you see as the chief executive of NASS as the main problem in the current Axial SPA care?
Well, I think the most singular problem is diagnostic delay, and all the data we have seem to indicate that the delay has not improved significantly, both in the UK and internationally. And you heard from Max there really the significant impacts on his social life, professional life, relationships, mental health, etc. So we've got to work particularly hard, I think, to address that. But we also know in terms of the treatment part of the pathway that patients get real variations in care. And just 2 years ago, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Axial SPA published the findings of a national inquiry into Axial SPA services in England, set against the NICE guidance. And it showed widespread failings, really, in terms of the lack of having inflammatory back pain pathways in place, or trusts where we don't have access to specialist rheumatology physiotherapists, or where patients don't get access to personalised flare management plans or access to psychological services. So there are big problems to post-diagnosis that we need to address.
So, I mean, we know that from the literature that the time to diagnosis approximately, depending on which case series you look at, 8, 10, 11 years. In your own mind, where would you like to see that?
So we set an ambition, which we published last June, to achieve a gold standard time to diagnosis of 12 months from the symptom onset to diagnosis with rheumatology. We consulted widely within the rheumatology community and with patients, and there was broad consensus that with some real effort, we think we could achieve that gold standard.
What strikes me, Dale, around this as well is that the time to diagnosis is significant, but actually the adult population that Axial SPA can affect is also significant. So it's that 1 in 200, approximately 220,000 people across the UK, which actually is twice the prevalence of conditions that we hear lots about, such as MS. And so when we're thinking about your role and sort of that experience that you have through your service improvement background and the passion you've just discussed around that really clear ambition, could you tell us a little bit more about why and where that kind of, how they came together? How is this where you've landed and quite why you think service improvement is the way to go about this?
So when I joined NASS in late 2017, NICE had published its clinical guideline. I saw the data on diagnostic delay and that the implication was that the delay hadn't really improved. And having had that experience of quality improvement, felt that we could bring that to Axial SPA and actually bring it to rheumatology more generally. And in fact, Aspiring to Excellence is the first at-scale quality improvement program anywhere in rheumatology in the UK, and we're really proud to have led the way in that. So the idea was to launch a program using something called the Model for Improvement, using a set of tools and theories that help clinicians in a systematic way think about how they can improve patient care and outcomes by changing their services. And the idea is that you help clinicians understand the problems and the variations in care, and you look at the data to see where those variations exist. You help clinicians understand their processes and their systems, particularly the patient pathway and how you can simplify it. And you provide those clinicians with tools and with a learning environment. And this is really key, Lucy, as you know, a learning environment where together you can identify your priorities for service improvement. You can pilot new ideas known as tests of change. You can share your data. You can refine your ideas. And it was bringing that approach to Axial SPA and allowing rheumatology departments to work on some common problems together, but also some site-specific ones. And we think that has a major role to play in reducing diagnostic delay and improving care.
Absolutely. And I think being a part of our programme is an absolute pleasure for myself. And I guess, Hasan, from your perspective as one of our lovely clinicians on the programme, is that collaboration that Dale just described there and present for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's been a great pleasure to be on the Axial programme. I will say it's hard work, and it's great that what the programme has done is actually brings everyone together and actually gives us focus and helping us actually achieve our goal. I mean, my goal for in the next couple of years is to actually reduce the time to diagnosis, which is what we've set. And you know, we've started the process, and I think with the help of colleagues, with help with NASS, and obviously with the help of you guys, the NHS Transformation Unit, I think we've been really well supported. And I think we're going to hear lots of stories in the next few podcasts to actually listen to other centres who can share their experiences and see how this Axial programme has also helped them.
And you know, Lucy, one of the important things, of course, is that all of this has been taking place in the context of COVID. What our report, which we published last year, shows is that having a structured approach to service improvement, having a learning system that brings people together, and having a set of tools to develop and test changes has enabled those rheumatology departments to stay engaged. And that's really impressive to do that whilst all the challenges of COVID, stay engaged and implement many of their planned improvement initiatives. So we're really proud we've achieved so much in such a challenging context.
Absolutely. And I think it does speak, doesn't it, to that testament of the passion that we have across the clinicians involved in that specific programme. It is awesome to see that in action and to be part of that. And to, as you say, stay the course through an incredibly challenging, some of us starring on TV, Hasan obviously, but during that time period of real challenge across the NHS, it has just been incredible. And I guess what really interests me, Dale, is that you started with that specific programme, but actually NASS has bigger aspirations, doesn't it? It's got other things up its sleeve. And I wonder if you want to tell us a little bit more about some of those other service improvement aspirations. You mentioned one earlier around the time to diagnosis. If you want to tell us a little bit more about those.
So our campaign Act on Axial Spark is a programme which is trying to reduce diagnostic delay by addressing each of what we think are four sets of barriers. A first set of barriers around general public's awareness of the symptoms and going to primary care. Secondly, getting earlier identification and referral within primary care. Thirdly, problems in secondary care services with not identifying patients and referring them on quickly enough to rheumatology. And then fourthly, even within rheumatology, getting a quicker diagnosis. So later this year, people will see our new Champions in Primary Care programme, which is a kind of sister programme to Aspiring to Excellence, working with primary care professionals. Later this year, we'll see a whole new educational set of resources for colleagues working in ophthalmology, dermatology and gastroenterology. And we're also looking to work with our colleagues in radiology to see how we can improve education and training interventions there to make sure that patients are being spotted quickly in their imaging.
So, Dale, can I ask you, I mean, these are great ideas, and again, a lot of us are hopefully going to copy and paste these ideas. How do you see success? How would you say that we've achieved our goal? Is it that someone's achieved a time to diagnosis of 12 months or less, or are there other aspects that you'll see as success? What other measures?
I think from a patient perspective, single most important will be timely diagnosis, and we're trying to work with others, including the National Early Inflammatory Arthritis Audit, to have better data at national level to track progress in that entire diagnostic pathway. But also we want to see patient-centred care that sees the whole person and that actively involves that whole person in decision-making about their treatment and care. So from a patient perspective, we want to see those things. I think from a clinician perspective, we hope that what we'll have done is created learning environments that have genuinely helped clinicians to explore problems in the delivery of their care and provide peer support to them, but also help to spread the learning about what works in the hope that we can create across the board improvements in care.
I don't want to be reinventing the wheel. I'd just rather have that information knowledge base and work with that. And how do you see NASS going and spreading that word or sharing that knowledge?
So we're hoping that the sites themselves who are involved in these programs will become demonstrations and others can visit them. Our Fourth Care Primary Care Champions program, we're hoping that the resources they generate will feed back into existing training opportunities, such as the Health Education Authority's primary care training hub. So feeding back resources into existing mechanisms for professional development. These podcasts, of course, will be one of many sets of things we'll be producing to promote the findings from our work. We'll be producing whole new resources later this year, as you'll see, aimed at secondary care services and rheumatology services, providing and curating resources that we hope will help to improve care.
I was part of the second cohort of this Aspiring to Excellence. Does NASS plan on having a third cohort?
So we've actually launched a third cohort, and we'll be announcing that shortly. And the third cohort will be different from the first two in that it will only focus on diagnostic delay. So we're really going to drill down, and we're now hoping that with 3 cohorts of rheumatology departments all working together, we can try and create a real critical mass, Hasan, and almost a social movement of people who are so invested in this and have got real data on how to make improvements in that diagnostic pathway. And we hope if we can do that, we can really accelerate changes.
A real powerhouse of improvers. That's what we're going for, isn't it, Dale?
Yes, it certainly is.
So I've been really struck throughout the conversation about the prevalence of axial SpA, the different ways in which it can present and that consequence upon the mental health issue, and not least mentioning that time to diagnosis. And I guess for me, it's really brought to life through Max's story and through some of our discussions and sharing of both your experience, Hasan and Dale, just how important this service improvement journey is going to be, and how important the work of NASS is within this space. Not least to mention how fabulous the clinicians and the operational teams are delivering these services in incredibly challenging situations over the past couple of years. So just really want to say a massive thank you, Dale, for your time and sharing your thoughts and experiences with us.
It's been such a pleasure, and thank you both for being such amazing co-hosts.
Thank you, Dale. Now we know why we're here. So join us for future episodes as we meet healthcare professionals from across the UK that will talk through their service improvement projects.
We're going to be looking at the art of data collection, understanding just how important it is to work out who your stakeholders are and then engage them alongside the different strategies you can use for that engagement right across the hospital and across collaboration across all different disciplines and right across that patient pathway, as well as working with patients to improve their experiences.
We're actually very excited to have experts who've been part of the Aspiring to Excellence programme from Newcastle, Leeds, Fife and Berkshire joining us over the course of the next few episodes, and hope you'll join us too.
For more information about this podcast, or if you fancy scrubbing up a bit of quality improvement methodology, there's some handy helpful videos for you if you visit nass.co.uk/room for improvement. See you next time.
Room for Improvement is brought to you by the Aspiring to Excellence programme from NASS, which is sponsored by AbbVie, Biogen, Lilly, Novartis and UCB, and in partnership with BritSPA and the NHS Transformation Unit.